course. I wish her all the very best. I can't wait to meet her, because we haven't yet met her yet, so hopefully.
In this video, we're diving into one of the most shocking royal secrets ever kept. A whisper that turned into a storm, a confession that shook the palace walls, and 4 words that changed everything. What really happened behind those golden gates? Why did Catherine disappear for months? And what secret was so dangerous that even the king tried to bury it? Stay with me, because by the end, you'll know the truth that the royal family never wanted you to hear. But before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another royal revelation. And here's my question for you. Do you think the royal family should always tell the truth, or are some secrets worth keeping? Drop your answer in the comments below, because I want to know what you think. It all started with whispers. Nobody knew where they came from, but suddenly everyone in the palace was talking. Staff members were making late-night phone calls. Important events were being cancelled without explanation. And Catherine? She was nowhere to be seen. Then, someone heard a palace worker say something strange. It changes everything. Those 3 words made everyone realize something huge was about to happen. The palace wasn't dealing with just gossip anymore. This was something that could change the royal family forever. So what was really going on behind those closed doors? People started getting suspicious when they noticed the pattern. Catherine used to have a regular schedule, events to attend, places to visit, people to meet. But suddenly everything changed. Her calendar was filled with private meetings that nobody knew about. Public appearances kept getting postponed. Every time an event was cancelled, newspapers went crazy trying to figure out why. But the scariest part wasn't the rumors flying around. It was the silence from the palace. Nobody was allowed to talk about what was happening. Workers who had been there for years were suddenly moved to different jobs. Even important royal advisors had no idea what was going on. Something was definitely wrong. Very wrong. Can you imagine working somewhere and suddenly everyone stops talking? The press found out Catherine was taking medical leave. Now, the palace had used that excuse before to hide royal scandals. But this time, it felt different. Reporters tried to get more information, but the palace only said it was a private medical matter. Those words alone made alarm bells ring. You see, in the royal family, privacy is almost never given unless something really serious is happening. That phrase became a secret code for something much bigger, a decision that could change not just Catherine's life, but the entire future of the monarchy. What could be so serious that the palace refused to say anything at all? At official events, William looked different. His smile didn't reach his eyes. His voice sounded distant and tired. Experts who study body language watched every movement, every look between William and Catherine. They noticed the two were growing apart emotionally. There was one moment caught on camera that got everyone talking. Catherine reached out and touched William's arm gently, but he pulled away almost immediately. It was just a second, but it was enough to make the whole world wonder what was wrong. But people who really knew William understood something important. He wasn't angry. He was scared. He knew the truth, or at least part of it, and it absolutely terrified him. What truth could be scary enough to make a future king pull away from his own wife? Behind the scenes, King Charles made a big move. He ordered all British newspapers to stop talking about Catherine's situation. Media companies received quiet warnings. If you mention Catherine's condition, we'll take legal action against you. Editors agreed, though they weren't happy about it. But whispers still got out to the public through careful language. Newspapers would write things like, "The Duchess's difficult months," or "A private family matter of great importance." These coded phrases only made people more curious. Meanwhile, Princess Anne and King Charles had private meetings that went late into the night. Anne, who always thinks practically, told him to be honest with the public. But Charles, who felt responsible for protecting the monarchy, demanded complete silence. The disagreement between father and daughter mirrored the growing divide between William and Catherine. The palace wasn't united anymore. It was breaking apart because of a secret that no crown could contain. And through all the confusion, one question haunted everyone. What was Catherine hiding? And why did she wait so long to speak? Catherine's absence from public view wasn't random. It was planned. Hidden from cameras, away from royal duties, she was protecting a secret that could break centuries of tradition. People close to the family whispered that a 4th child had been born in complete secrecy. Never announced, never acknowledged. But it was more than just a hidden birth. It was a cover-up ordered by the highest authority in Britain. Before we go deeper, make sure you're subscribed, because you won't want to miss what happens next. How can a royal baby be born without anyone knowing? Catherine's disappearance started slowly. First, she missed one event. Then she postponed a trip. At first, the palace explained it away with polished statements about personal rest and family time. But as weeks turned into months, even loyal royal supporters knew something was wrong. Behind that perfect public image, Catherine wasn't just taking a break. She was protecting something that no royal advisor could handle, no press officer could control. Every time she canceled an appearance, it was a battle between what her heart wanted and what her duty demanded. It was a fight between telling the truth and surviving. What would you do if you had to choose between your family and your duty? Rumors exploded when someone saw Catherine visiting a private medical facility with extremely tight security. Officials said it was just a routine checkup, but witnesses described unmarked cars, arrivals at midnight, and staff being forced to give up their phones. The level of secrecy was suffocating. Then something even more shocking happened. One of the palace's top doctors suddenly resigned. His statement was vague. He mentioned ethical concerns, but insiders knew the truth. He had argued with King Charles himself. The tension between the king's desire to protect the monarchy's image and Catherine's maternal instinct to protect her unborn child had reached a breaking point. People say that Catherine even used a fake name during a secret hospital visit. She registered under a false identity, so no official record would connect her to the birth. Only a handful of trusted staff knew what was really happening. One nurse later described the atmosphere as otherworldly, as if the palace walls themselves were holding their breath. Every single move was planned perfectly. No media, no leaks, no evidence. What kind of secret requires this much hiding? But even inside the palace, the secrecy started to crack. People who once thought Catherine was completely loyal now questioned her judgment. They wondered what could possibly be so dangerous that it required lying to the entire nation. For Catherine, carrying this emotional burden was crushing. She was torn between her instinct to protect and nurture, and her fear of betraying the crown. She lived every day haunted by what might happen if the truth came out. Her once bright confidence faded into quiet isolation. Even William, though fiercely protective of her, struggled to fully understand her decision. His sense of duty to the monarchy clashed with his love for his wife. Their once unbreakable bond became strained, filled with questions nobody asked out loud and sleepless nights. Catherine's silence became the very thing that separated them. It was an invisible wall built not from lack of trust, but from love twisted by fear. Could silence really be an act of love? Nobody could have predicted what would happen next. Catherine's breaking point wasn't her silence. It was what she finally said when she couldn't hide anymore. When Catherine finally spoke, the entire world held its breath. 4 words, simple, raw, and devastating. They escaped her lips during a private conversation that was never supposed to be public. But someone recorded it. Within hours, those 4 words leaked everywhere, sending Buckingham Palace into complete chaos. The woman once known for grace and composure had just made the most shocking confession of her royal life. What were those 4 words? It happened during what was supposed to be a quiet, private meeting between Catherine and a senior member of her household staff. For months, Catherine had been under tremendous pressure. Public speculation, family arguments, and the unbearable weight of keeping secrets. Every step she took was watched by eyes that waited and whispered. When the pressure finally became too much, her composure broke. The truth spilled out, not in anger, but in heartbreak. People who were in the room said her voice was shaking but defiant, a tone born from pain and exhaustion. It was a confession not of guilt, but of desperation. A royal aide who had been trusted for over 10 years overheard the conversation. Whether it was an accident or on purpose, nobody knows. But within hours, the recording was in the hands of someone who understood how important it was. Can you imagine having your private moment shared with the world? He isn't William's child. 4 words that ripped through royal tradition like thunder through silence. The implications were staggering. If this was true, it threatened to shake the very foundation of royal succession, questioning the bloodline of the monarchy itself. People who heard the recording said there was no hatred in Catherine's tone, only deep sorrow, as though she was finally surrendering to a truth she could no longer hide. Inside the palace, chaos erupted. Phones were seized, hallways were locked down, and senior aides were called to emergency meetings that lasted all night. The royal press office went completely dark, refusing to comment on anything. Charles reportedly demanded to know who had leaked the recording. All family communications were frozen. Staff were told to delete all personal messages, emails, and call logs. It was a total lockdown, the kind of silence reserved only for moments that could bring a monarchy to its knees. What happens when a secret this big gets out? For William, the blow was incomprehensible. People close to him said he sat alone in his study for hours, replaying those words again and again. His face was empty, his eyes fixed on the floor. His silence became the loudest sound in the palace. He refused to answer phone calls, refused to make statements, and at first, he even refused to confront Catherine. The man once seen as the unshakable heir was suddenly lost, torn between loyalty to his wife and the unbearable question of what was true. Yet beneath all the scandal and speculation, something far more complex was happening. For Catherine, those 4 words weren't just a confession. They were an act of defiance. The world heard betrayal, but behind those words lay something deeper, something protective. Because the truth wasn't just about betrayal. It was about protection, legacy, and the price of being royal. Could those 4 words actually mean something completely different? The world saw William smiling at a charity event days later, but those who really knew him saw the cracks beneath the surface. Behind closed doors, his silence was deafening. He had faced press scandals before, but this one cut into his bloodline, his very identity as a future king. Friends revealed he didn't speak for 48 hours straight. He refused to eat, only staring at a framed photo of his family as the storm built around him. In those hours of silence, William's world collapsed inward. The man who had spent his entire life preparing to protect the monarchy now stood powerless against a truth that threatened to undo everything. The same institution that had defined him since birth now demanded he separate his emotions from his duty. But the pain of betrayal was too personal to hide behind royal formality. How long can someone stay silent when their world is falling apart? Staff described an atmosphere of dread within Kensington Palace. Doors were shut. Conversations were whispered. The sound of William pacing echoed late into the night. He wasn't acting like the heir to the throne anymore. He was a husband and a father, broken and unsure of what to believe. When King Charles finally stepped in, the confrontation was inevitable. The king, always practical, insisted that control must come first. Reputation above emotion, silence above honesty. But William refused to be calmed down. For the first time in years, the tension between father and son exploded into open defiance. Charles spoke about public image and legacy, while William demanded truth. The king warned him that showing emotion was a weakness that could destroy them all. But William countered that lies had already done the destroying. People who were there remembered his voice shaking, not from fear, but from rage he had held back too long. Was this the moment William stopped being his father's obedient son? That night marked a turning point. William was no longer his father's dutiful son. He was a man torn between preserving the monarchy and protecting his wife. The weight of that decision grew even heavier when Prince George asked an innocent question over breakfast. He wanted to know why everyone on television was whispering about their family. The words cut William like glass. How could he explain betrayal, secrecy, and doubt to a child who still saw the world in black and white? He excused himself from the table, retreating once again into the same silence that had haunted him for days. In that moment, the future king realized the monarchy wasn't just losing the trust of the nation. It was losing the trust of its next generation. Can a monarchy survive when even its own children question it? Princess Anne, always the quiet voice of reason, visited William shortly after. She didn't offer comfort, only truth. Truth has a cost, she said simply, her eyes steady. It was both a warning and wisdom, the kind of advice only someone who had survived the crown's shadows could give. Her words lingered long after she left, stirring something in William that even grief couldn't suppress. He began to see the storm not as a punishment, but as a reckoning. A chance to define his reign not through obedience, but through courage. And just as the monarchy began to fracture from within, an unlikely royal ally stepped in to confront Catherine herself. Who would dare confront Catherine at a time like this? No one confronts Catherine and walks away unchanged, but Princess Anne did. Known for her no-nonsense loyalty to the crown, Anne arranged a quiet meeting at Sandringham Estate. Insiders later called it a reckoning. Anne demanded the truth, not for the tabloids, not for the monarchy, but for her mother's legacy. What Catherine revealed that afternoon left even the Iron Princess speechless, blurring the line between royal duty and human heartbreak. Anne's arrival was unannounced. Her tone was direct. Her purpose was clear. She had watched the family unravel in silence for too long. While others talked about damage control and press statements, Anne wanted real answers. The chaos surrounding Catherine's confession had gone far beyond gossip. It had pierced the heart of royal credibility. To Anne, who had spent her entire life upholding her mother's values, the thought of another scandal destroying that legacy was unbearable. What would Anne discover in that room? Yet beneath Anne's hardened exterior was something unspoken. Fear. Fear that the monarchy her mother had held together with grace was on the brink of crumbling from within. When the two women finally sat face to face, there was no ceremony, no royal pretense, only truth waiting to be spoken. Anne's voice, sharp yet steady, cut through the silence. She demanded to know why Catherine had stayed silent, why she had allowed rumors to grow and shame to spread. Catherine, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply whispered that her silence was never meant to deceive. It was meant to protect. The words hung in the air like a confession wrapped in grief. What was Catherine really protecting? Anne pressed harder, but the more Catherine spoke, the clearer it became that the 4 words the world had heard were not a literal admission of betrayal. They were a desperate attempt to shield someone else. Through tears, Catherine revealed the torment of living between truth and survival. Her secret, she explained, was not a denial of loyalty, but an act of sacrifice. She had chosen to endure suspicion and hatred rather than expose an innocent life to the relentless cruelty of the world. Her 4 words were meant to misdirect, to draw attention away from the real story, the existence of someone whose safety could not be guaranteed if the truth emerged. In that moment, Anne saw not a scheming duchess, but a woman suffocating beneath the weight of compassion. Could Catherine's lie actually be an act of love? For the first time in her life, Princess Anne hesitated. The rigid lines of duty that had defined her began to blur. She realized that Catherine's strength wasn't rebellion. It was restraint. Every tear, every silence, every false statement had been part of a greater act of protection. The truth Anne had demanded came not as a weapon, but as a wound. When Anne finally stood to leave, her words were softer than expected. She told Catherine that truth, no matter how painful, could also be freeing, but warned that once spoken, it could never be contained again. That night, as Anne drove away from Sandringham, her thoughts refused to settle. She had come seeking clarity, and left with questions she could not answer. Deep down, she knew that the truth she thought she understood was already slipping from her hands. What truth was still hidden? For King Charles, this scandal was more than personal. It was existential. With the monarchy's image already fragile, he demanded absolute control. Late-night crisis meetings followed. Legal threats were sent to the press. A chilling royal decree was issued. Charles was willing to rewrite history itself to save the family name. But in silencing Catherine, he didn't realize he was igniting a fire that would soon consume his reign. The days following Catherine's meeting with Anne were some of the most turbulent of Charles's rule. Panic rippled through the palace as whispers of the recording and speculation about the 4th child reached every corner of the British press. Though official media remained quiet under legal pressure, the public was restless. Online forums and foreign news outlets churned out story after story, each more sensational than the last. For Charles, it was a nightmare he thought he had left behind with Diana's death. A reminder that personal failures could destroy the monarchy faster than any political revolution. What would Charles do to protect the crown? Determined to restore order, Charles summoned his most trusted advisors and convened an emergency meeting of the Privy Council. The agenda was simple: containment at all costs. What emerged from that meeting would later be known as Operation Silent Air. A confidential memo was sent to senior officials detailing a plan to neutralize the scandal before it reached irreversible proportions. The operation called for suppressing any rumors of DNA testing, sealing hospital records, and ensuring no staff members spoke to the press under any circumstances. Legal teams were sent to threaten major outlets with defamation lawsuits. Confidential documents were ordered destroyed. Every trace of the child's existence was to be erased from public record. But the deeper Charles tried to bury the truth, the more cracks began to form within his inner circle. Could even a king bury the truth forever? Not everyone agreed with Charles's tactics. Advisors loyal to Queen Elizabeth's legacy urged transparency, warning that the monarchy could not survive another cover-up. Others, however, believed the crown's survival depended on silence. The arguments grew vicious. One senior aide reportedly warned Charles that history would not forgive him if he turned the monarchy into a dictatorship of secrets. But the king's patience had worn thin. He saw himself as the last line of defense against chaos and believed that leadership meant sacrifice, even if that sacrifice was truth itself. Catherine, however, refused to bow. When presented with a document, an official secrecy oath forbidding her from ever speaking about the matter again, she tore it apart right in front of them. Her voice, calm but resolute, echoed through the room as she declared she would not be bound by fear. What happens when a princess defies a king? People present later described King Charles's face as pale with fury. The confrontation marked the first undeniable fracture between the king and the Princess of Wales. It was no longer just a scandal. It was a war, principle versus power, truth versus survival. And as Charles tightened his grip on the truth, believing he could outmaneuver fate itself, he overlooked the one force he couldn't control, the relentless pursuit of the free press. While the palace played chess with the truth, a single journalist was about to expose what they had fought so hard to bury. Who was this journalist and what did he find? He was warned to stop digging. His emails were deleted. His press access was revoked. His phone was mysteriously tapped. But one journalist who had once covered Diana's final years recognized a familiar pattern: silence born from royal fear. Determined to uncover the truth, he followed digital traces, secret files, and a midwife's sworn testimony. What he found didn't just confirm Catherine's secret. It revealed a royal pact stretching back to Queen Elizabeth herself. His name was Thomas Hargreaves, a seasoned investigative reporter who had spent decades chasing stories most wouldn't dare touch. He had seen how the crown operated in the shadows, how inconvenient truths were erased, and how Diana's attempts to tell her story were silenced until it was too late. For Thomas, this wasn't about scandal. It was about unfinished business. Could one journalist bring down the palace's wall of silence? The same system that had crushed Diana's voice was now closing in on Catherine, and Thomas refused to let history repeat itself. When word of Operation Silent Air reached his desk, he knew he was onto something that went far deeper than anyone suspected. Thomas began by tracing hospital records, but what he found was startling. Several files from the Royal Medical Archive were missing or encrypted under restricted access. With help from a whistleblower inside the National Health Database, he unearthed an unregistered birth record dated within the months of Catherine's disappearance. It was listed under an alias only used by the royal household. But there was no name for the father, only a sealed reference code linking back to an internal royal directive. It was the first tangible proof that Catherine's story wasn't made up. It was buried. What else had been hidden? Soon after, an anonymous insider contacted Thomas using a private channel. The source claimed to have served as part of the royal medical staff during the time in question. They confirmed that the child did exist and that the cover-up had been sanctioned at the highest level. The source's chilling words stayed with Thomas. This wasn't about scandal. It was about succession. The revelation that the child's biological father might be connected to another branch of the royal bloodline sent Thomas spiraling into dangerous territory. It suggested an internal family decision to protect the monarchy's continuity, even if it meant rewriting lineage itself. But Thomas wasn't only chasing documents, he was chasing humanity. Could the truth about succession change everything? In an unexpected twist, Catherine herself agreed to meet Thomas. Off the record, in a moment of quiet vulnerability, she asked for one thing: compassion. Her voice trembled as she explained that the truth wasn't born of deceit, but of sacrifice. "If you publish," she said softly, "make sure they know I did it for love." That meeting changed him. The story was no longer just a headline. It was a tragedy that revealed the monarchy's capacity to demand silence, even from those who had given it everything. When Thomas prepared to publish, a wave of suppression struck. His servers were hacked. His editors were threatened. The story was pulled from international outlets at the last minute. Within hours, a coordinated media blackout swept across Britain. It was as if the story had never existed. Could the truth ever escape? But the truth had already slipped through cracks that could not be sealed forever. And as Thomas watched the palace scramble to contain the inevitable, he knew something big was coming. Because even the journalist didn't foresee the next move, a televised royal statement that would change everything. Millions tuned in. Catherine and William appeared side by side, faces pale, hands clasped tightly. What the world expected was denial, but what they witnessed was redemption. With tears in her eyes, Catherine addressed the nation, her voice trembling as she spoke of truth, protection, and the burden of secrets. "I am not ashamed," she said. What would Catherine reveal to the world? As the monarchy's future hung in the balance, and the world waited for the king's response, the broadcast began without warning. No royal correspondent predicted it. No press outlet was briefed. It was an unprecedented act of defiance wrapped in dignity. As the image of the Prince and Princess of Wales filled screens worldwide, millions went silent. For the first time in history, the royal family's crisis wasn't being managed behind closed doors. It was unfolding before the eyes of an entire nation. Catherine's words carried the weight of every silent moment, every suppressed truth, every sleepless night spent hiding what should never have been hidden. She began softly, her tone fragile but unflinching. She spoke of choices made in fear, of love twisted by pressure, and of a child who was never meant to be a symbol of shame. Would the world forgive her? The truth, Catherine said, was never betrayal. It was protection. In her statement, she confirmed what the palace had denied for months. The child existed, but instead of expressing guilt, she spoke with the strength of a mother who refused to let the world weaponize her love. The tension in her voice cracked, only when she admitted she had lived too long under silence ordered by power, not conscience. Beside her, William said nothing at first. His presence alone spoke louder than any royal decree. When he finally did speak, his words were few but firm. He acknowledged that mistakes had been made, not by Catherine, but by those who had forced the family to choose secrecy over compassion. "Our duty," he declared, "is not to the throne, but to truth." How would the nation respond? The phrase, "truth over titles," spread like wildfire within minutes, printed across headlines, shared in millions of posts, repeated by people who had once doubted them. In that moment, the couple stood not as heirs to the monarchy, but as parents and partners, united against an empire that had tried to break them. The nation's response was immediate and overwhelming. Crowds gathered outside palace gates, holding signs of support. Global news anchors spoke of courage, humanity, and the dawning of a new royal era. Public sympathy shifted overnight. Catherine was no longer the accused. She was the wounded mother who chose honesty over survival. Her vulnerability became her strength, and her refusal to hide became a declaration of independence. Even critics of the crown called it the most human moment in royal history. But was the storm really over? But as applause echoed across the nation, another storm was already brewing inside the palace. Behind those ancient walls, loyalists whispered in disbelief, and the king's closest advisors demanded action. The truth had escaped their control, and its consequences were only beginning to unfold. While the world celebrated Catherine's courage, the palace walls whispered one final twist, one that redefined everything we thought we knew. Weeks after the broadcast, a sealed letter arrived at Kensington Palace, addressed to Catherine in Queen Elizabeth II's own handwriting. It was dated years before Her Majesty's passing. Inside were words that silenced every critic. "Blood may bind us, but love redeems us." The letter hinted that the Queen had foreseen this storm, and had left behind her blessing for the child no one was ever meant to know about. What did the Queen know? The envelope was delivered in absolute discretion, its existence known only to a handful of aides. Catherine, already weary from weeks of public scrutiny, opened it quietly in her private study. The moment her eyes met the familiar handwriting, she froze. The script was unmistakably steady, graceful, and tinged with the warmth only Queen Elizabeth could convey. The words within were not just a message, they were prophetic. The Queen spoke of truth emerging at a cost, of storms that would test the House of Windsor, and of love's power to outlast deception. It was as if she had seen it all coming, the silence, the scandal, the heartbreak, and had chosen to leave Catherine not instructions, but absolution. Could the Queen have predicted this all along? The letter's tone was maternal and majestic. It spoke of compassion over convention, reminding Catherine that the strength of the monarchy was not in its secrecy, but in its humanity. "There will come a time," the Queen had written, "when silence will no longer protect us. When that moment comes, choose love, and you will honor this crown more than any duty ever could." Catherine read the lines again and again, tears falling onto the aged parchment. It wasn't just permission to be forgiven. It was permission to forgive herself. When William read the letter later that evening, he did so aloud before senior family members. His voice faltered halfway through, emotion cracking beneath the weight of his grandmother's foresight. Even Charles sat in uncharacteristic silence, his face unreadable, while Anne's eyes glistened with restrained pride. How would this letter change everything? Only Camilla remained motionless, her expression caught between disbelief and disapproval. To her, the letter's message was dangerous. It legitimized a truth that had already shaken the monarchy to its core. But for the rest of the family, it was something else entirely. A lifeline. In the weeks that followed, the palace began to shift its stance. There were no public statements, no official admissions, but subtle gestures spoke louder than decrees. A quiet acknowledgement was made in the form of inclusion, an unspoken recognition that the child, once erased from record, was now part of royal history. It wasn't triumph, nor was it surrender, it was balance. Can a monarchy change without admitting it was wrong? The monarchy had learned that survival did not come from perfection, but from acceptance. For Catherine and William, the Queen's words became a compass. The storm that once threatened to destroy them had instead refined them. They understood that the crown's greatest test was never the weight of tradition, but the courage to evolve. The Queen's final message lingered like a whisper through the palace halls, a reminder that even in silence, truth finds its way to light. As history writes its next chapter, one thing remains clear. In a world built on crowns and silence, Catherine's 4 words became the echo that changed the monarchy forever. So what do you think? Was Catherine right to protect the truth for so long? Or should she have spoken up sooner? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I really want to hear your perspective on this. And if you found this story as fascinating as I did, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe for more royal revelations you won't find anywhere else. Hit that notification bell so you're always first to know when we uncover the next royal secret. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.